and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. 4 years ago, on February 1st, 2021, Myanmar's military staged a coup, overturning a democratically elected government. 4 years later, the country remains in turmoil, but will 2025 mark a turning point for Myanmar? This is because resistance forces have gained ground, and the junta, which have become increasingly internationally isolated, is proposing a general election, which many view as an empty bid for legitimacy. So is Myanmar moving closer to democracy, or is it the opposite? Is it moving deeper into chaos? Well, Debbie Stothard joins us now. She's the founder of the democracy advocacy group, Alternative ASEAN Network for Burma, on Burma. Debbie, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I appreciate your time. I'm hoping we can begin our conversation maybe by you helping us understand the situation currently in Myanmar in terms of the junta's control over the country. How has it changed since the 2021 coup?
Well, hi, Melissa. Always happy to be here. One thing we need to understand that a lot of people in ASEAN haven't woken up to is that this illegal junta has been losing and the coup has not been completed. They're not successful. At this point, the resistance forces control 50% of the country. The military junta has only stable control of 20% of the country, namely Yangon, Naypyidaw, the capital, and Mandalay. So the main cities are largely under military control, but we can still see a lot of skirmishes, a lot of resistance happening, including lightning flash mobs protesting against the junta. But outside of these main cities, the junta has not been able to gain much control. In fact, what we have seen since the coup began on 1st of February 2021 is more than 50,000 armed clashes and attacks against civilians. In 2024, it intensified so that there was on average 1,000 armed clashes and attacks against civilians in the country per month. Airstrikes have grown. There's been 3,310 air and drone strikes in the country. In October last year, just a couple of months ago, just in October alone, there were 294 air and drone strikes in the country, mainly targeting civilians, homes, mosques, churches, Buddhist monasteries, schools, and clinics and hospitals. So the junta is actually losing. They've been trying to hold some type of election to attempt to get some legitimacy. But what we are seeing is that they were only able to count the population in their so-called census in only 44% of the population. And in most cases, these were estimates based on maps, not actually being on the ground. And when we look at the map of where they were able to reach the population and the map of where the airstrikes have been happening, we could see that this junta is essentially killing civilians in places where they may not get a vote. So this is literally killing off the opposition. But I think more concerning is the fact that the junta's election commission has outlawed quite a few key political parties. And it now means that those who were allowed to be registered for the junta's elections represent only 2.7% of the parliamentary seats won in 2020. So overall, it is looking quite horrendous, but we've also seen the resistance make a lot of ground. And as a result, the junta has been losing troops. People have been defecting. People have even joined the resistance. And so since February 2024, this illegal junta has started forcibly conscripting men and women between the age of 18 and 35. So for Malaysia, every time Malaysia deports people from Burma back to Myanmar, they are basically providing free recruits, people who will be forced to join the army to prolong the conflict on the ground. So this is actually quite a serious situation. So 2025 is going to be a make or break year for many of the Burma movement.
Right, Debbie. So I want to talk about this this attempt to organize an election this year. I know we can only posit a guess that this is a bid for legitimacy. But what is the end game here? What is the how do we respond to this? International community respond to this, and how are the People's Defense and Resistance Forces going to respond if there is an election held?
Firstly, there's been a lot of effort by the junta to go around ASEAN to say we're going to have an election and then this might solve the problem. So please don't do anything. Wait and see. And the danger is that ASEAN will go along with this, take a tidak apa attitude, say, oh, they're going to have election, no need to do anything. And that will actually give the military much more opportunity to kill more people and wipe out the resistance. This is what they want to do. So I think we really need to understand at this point that a sham election is really a delaying tactic, trying to delay and to stave off regional and international pressure. And what we should be doing, instead of backing the losers, is to actually say, we are not going to give you anybody who could be used, forcibly conscripted in the army. We're not going to give you funds or weapons or equipment that can be used to prolong this conflict. Because every day the military is able to have access to weapons, is every day more people will be killed and more people will be displaced into ASEAN countries.
Well, the Malaysian foreign minister, I think, said recently at an ASEAN ministers retreat, said that a ceasefire is what should be a priority now, not elections. Can I ask you about that? Is that what is currently needed most now? You pointed to airstrikes and drone strikes last year, but there are some people who argue that because the junta is facing imminent collapse, is currently losing, a ceasefire will allow it to draw breath, so to speak. How do you weigh this?
I think at this point, China has been pressuring some of the armed groups who have been winning in this resistance to agree to a ceasefire. But traditionally, these kinds of ceasefires have actually been very dangerous for local people because the military has traditionally used ceasefires to strengthen their presence in an area and actually inflict more violence. If you go back, I mean, I'm an oldie, so I've been working on Burma for 37 years. So we used to joke that peace talks will create more conflict, so we should have war talks instead. But the tradition of the military is that before they have ceasefire talks or peace talks, they will increase their violence to strengthen their leverage in the peace talks. But also, when they have a ceasefire, usually it's the military themselves that violates the ceasefire by trying to grab land for economic benefit or by firing on people or cracking down on the local population. So I think the women's movement in Burma has been the strongest on this. They've been saying that if you're going to have any kind of peace agreement, civilian protection should be the priority, and it shouldn't be an opportunity for one side or the other to draw breath, get a reprieve, and start consolidating their weapons. There has to be something more, the next step beyond a ceasefire. And this is where there's a problem in in Burma, Myanmar, that no one has actually supported a proper transition. Between 2004 and 2010, ASEAN read the Riot Act when the military arrested Aung San Suu Kyi in 2004. And in fact, they tried to kill her. And there was so much international pressure and sanctions that they came up with a roadmap to have elections in 2010, where the NLD was not allowed to participate. But eventually, things started moving forward. But the problem there was the compromise, that there was a power sharing. The military still called the shots in this so-called civilian democracy. And when the military party kept losing elections, they were bad losers, they had a coup. So if we are actually going to move forward and solve this situation, we need to listen to the women and the young people of the country, which is the military have to go back to the barracks. They have no place in parliament, they have no place in politics, and they have no place in running the main corporations of the country.
Debbie, so are you saying that the going back to the status quo is not ideal, not even wanted anymore, that the power sharing system that you talked about with the military that preceded the 2021 coup, is that no desire to go back to that status quo?
Absolutely. I think people in Burma, especially young people and women, have learned their lesson. They said this power sharing sucks. It's creating more problems and the danger of another coup and a danger of another military dictatorship. So I think we do need to understand that we need to listen to the aspirations of people. And, you know, Malaysia, as the chair of ASEAN this year, the slogan is inclusivity and sustainability. And I think in many respects, this applies so much to the situation in Burma, Myanmar. ASEAN needs to be inclusive in their approach. They can't just keep talking to the losing military side. They need to be, and they need to think about sustainable peace and development in the country.
Can I ask you what the alternative is? If the power sharing agreements, the centralized power sharing agreements is no longer desirable, what then would a federal style democracy or federal governance system structure look like for Burma, Myanmar?
Well, it's already happening. In many areas under resistance control, local people have set up local government, which is the first time in the history of the country almost since 1962, because local government was still run by the general administrative decision of the army. There's no civil administration. So this time we're seeing local people forming the local government, trying to set up law enforcement, courts, and even jails, and local health and education systems. In Karenni or Kayar state, which is one of the smaller states, which was one of the worst hit by military violence, where even the state capital was subjected to airstrikes, where 2/3 of the population was displaced sometimes more than once. They set up the Karenni State Consultative Council, and they set up the interim revolutionary government in Karenni State called the Interim Executive Council. Now, within 18 months, these folks have actually not just set up a governance, they've actually implemented 30% women's leadership in the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And hello, excuse me, Malaysia, it's like 12% women parliamentarians after so many years of development. So, you know, the thing is that the violence is horrifying, and these are basically war crimes and crimes against humanity. But the resistance is so strong that, you know, in the midst of being subjected to airstrikes and all kinds of violence, they are actually setting up their systems. And not only that, they seem to be doing a good job, much better than the military ever did. So I hope that Malaysian decision makers, the Malaysian government, as the leaders of ASEAN this year, will pay attention and start asking the resistance, what's your vision? What is the solution you're working on? And maybe we need to work with you if we want to ensure there's inclusivity and sustainability in the peace process in Burma.
Right. On that note, Debbie, when we think about how ASEAN has engaged with Myanmar as a member of the bloc, clearly there's very little progress or limited success, or I would say no progress at all in the 5-point consensus on Myanmar. How do we think about Malaysia as chair this year, navigating the different actors involved, ranging from the junta to the members of the resistance forces, to ethnic groups, to civil society? I'm wondering what the dynamics are, the complications in engaging those different actors can be for ASEAN member states.
I think among some of the ASEAN governments, the mentality is we don't, they may be bad, but at least we just deal with one of them, and somehow, they will become less terrible. But I think this is really a kind of a apathetic and disempowering attitude that ASEAN has. Firstly, the 5-point consensus is an abject failure, but ASEAN will not abandon it, because April 2021, when the consensus was adopted, was probably one of the only points in time that ASEAN had a unified approach on Burma, Myanmar. Since then, ASEAN has split. Thailand's ganged up with Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, India, and China to try and come up with a 1.5 track, etc., etc. Most of it is really aimed at saying, okay, they're going to have an election, even if it's not democratic or inclusive or whatever, we don't care, as long as they did an election, and then we can normalize relationship and we go back to normal. But I think that is a recipe for disaster for the rest of ASEAN. Now, Malaysia is acutely aware and committed to the rights of Palestinians who are facing genocide under the Netanyahu regime. What we need to be aware is that the ACLED database, which tracks conflicts across the world, now identifies Myanmar as the second most severe conflict in the world after Palestine. Although Ukraine is the most deadly in terms of cumulative, the number of people who have died since Russia invaded Ukraine, but we know Palestine. We are concerned about Palestine, but the scary wake-up call that we need to pay attention to is that Myanmar is considered the second most severe by the experts after Palestine. And we need to respond to that, because Myanmar is our front yard. Myanmar is part of ASEAN.
Right. Well, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has sought an arrest warrant for Myanmar's junta chief, Min Aung Hlaing. Can I ask you whether you think that has made any practical or significant impact on the junta's behavior since it was announced?
Well, firstly, the junta started investing in diplomacy. They've hired diplomats to go around ASEAN to sweet talk ASEAN and the rest of the international community, because they understand this is a serious matter. However, they still feel pretty safe in ASEAN, because not many ASEAN governments are particular supporters of the International Criminal Court. But I think for many people from Burma and for activists and other folks who are concerned about international justice, this has moral power.
So Malaysia, as chair of ASEAN, has also appointed a new special envoy for Myanmar, the special envoy for the ASEAN chair on Myanmar. And I'm wondering what you would like to see this new envoy prioritize. Are there any lessons that he can take moving forward from the limited success of previous envoys?
Well, Tan Sri Osman Hashim has a really great pedigree. He retired as the senior most diplomat of Malaysia, He also was the chair of Suhakam, so he actually knows about human rights. But he's also been, as a diplomat, served in various countries and been present in various intergovernmental organizations like the UN Human Rights Council. So he knows what international human rights law is about, what international standards are about, but also as a senior diplomat with many years of experience, should have in his toolkit a whole bunch of knowledge and skills and networks to navigate the minefield that is Myanmar. So I think hopefully he understands that he needs to work on principle, and he needs to have a spine. He needs to have some backbone to ensure not just in dealing with all the actors, but also ensuring that ASEAN governments listen when it comes to solutions for Burma, Myanmar.
You said that the junta feels relatively safe within ASEAN. Can I ask you why that is, and how do we, what's the missing piece in holding the junta accountable within ASEAN?
I think ASEAN needs to at least be united at the minimum standard of applying pressure on the junta, and also of ensuring that individual governments have the freedom to either join sanctions or to work in partnership with entities that are applying sanctions on the military junta. If not, the junta is not going to respect ASEAN. And this goes back to Cyclone Nargis in 2007, when all the ASEAN governments basically everyone was trying to send aid to Burma, Myanmar. And, you know, over 100,000 people, at least 100,000 people had been killed just by the cyclone because the junta refused to inform people to get out of the way. And ASEAN was begging to allow aid to go into the country, but the then Senior General Tan Sri refused. Finally, in a regional security meeting in Singapore, ASEAN representatives told Myanmar, if you don't cooperate with ASEAN, if any of those Western countries like UK, US, France, their navies who are parked offshore on standby from Burma, if they sail up the Irrawaddy and come and deliver aid, we will not object. That's when the militaries relented and said, okay, we will find a way to accommodate ASEAN as long as, you know, these Western navies don't come into Myanmar territory. And that was how ASEAN very smartly leveraged and used pressure to get the military to behave. It's time we actually adopted some backbone and understand that today, 2025 is really a make or break year for the military junta and for the democracy movement, and by that token for ASEAN as well, if we want to see a resolution. And both carrot and stick must be deployed. In this case, we had too many carrots and not enough stick, and it's time that ASEAN wielded a stick.
Debbie, thank you so much for speaking with me. I appreciate your time and your insights. That was Debbie Stothard from the Alternative ASEAN Network on Burma. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thanks so much for watching and good night.